This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Today, it's my honor and my privilege to introduce to you a colleague and a friend of mine, like someone who has made a huge difference in the world, and sometimes he likes to downplay it. But it is a deep and honest pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Mark Goulston. So Mark is here with us, and wow, it's just great to have somebody of this stature. Now, the truth is, Mark doesn't like to see himself as being someone of high stature and likes to really be of service to all of humanity, for which there's all sorts of experience that he has in that area. And instead, what we're really going to do here, or maybe along with this, is show that that's part of his genius, part of his charm, part of his contribution. It's a deep pleasure to introduce to you, my listeners, Dr. Mark Goulston. Mark, thanks for being on the show today. It's really great to have you.
Well, thank you, Fred. Thanks for having me on. I'm a little bit intimidated because I think you're more legitimate than me.
Well, we can have that kind of competitive conversation in another call, but today, thanks for making me laugh. That's really funny. And I really get it. I really think that you're more legitimate than me, and maybe that's part of who we both are. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. So let me give a little piece of your bio, the bio you provided for us, to our listeners, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yes. So Mark Goulston is a psychiatrist, a fellow psychiatrist, actually, and a fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Mark is a former UCLA professor of psychiatry and also has done FBI and police hostage negotiator training, where Mark is really foremost, where he is known, I think, among the many things he is, it's a foremost authority on suicide prevention and post-traumatic stress disorder. And maybe more so, he is a TEDx speaker. And one of his books called Just Listen has been translated into 27 languages and became the top book in the world on listening. And this man's calling me more legitimate than him. That's why I think this is so hilarious. Anyways, back to your bio. In your most recent book, which is called Why Cope When You Can Heal, you introduced to the world the process of surgical empathy, which Mark developed and helps people to heal from trauma. In this day and age, COVID-19 has become certainly the foremost topic to be here and to listen to. And this book really addresses that. And then on top of all this, Mark has his own highly rated podcast called My Wake Up Call and his linked live show called No Strings Attached. He's also one of the founding members of the Newsweek Expert Forum, and it goes on and on. So thanks for sharing some of that bio with us, Mark. And really, let's start off with my butchering of your last title here. Can you tell us a little bit about your newest book?
Yeah, the newest book is called Why Cope When You Can Heal, How Healthcare Heroes of COVID-19 Can Recover from PTSD.
Thank you. What are you finding, Mark? I mean, again, we could launch into COVID-19, but I'd like to give you an opportunity that I give a lot of my guests. I ask what I call 8-letter question. There's only 8 letters in the entire question. I guess it's really 9, which is, Mark Goulston, who are you?
Well, I'm a person who dropped out of medical school twice for untreated depression.
Mm.
And who the medical school wanted to kick out because they were losing matching funds every time I took a leave of absence.
Mm.
And the second time I dropped out, I met with the head of the school, and he was focused on, money. And I could see if I looked at it through the lens of fundraising, ROI, I probably would have kicked me out too. Going out for a second leave of absence. This guy's never going to be a doctor. So I met with him, and then the dean of students called me and said, I got a letter here from the other dean, and you better come in. So I think I was at a low point, Fred, because I come from a background, depression age parents, where your worth is what you do. And if you can't do much, you're not worth much. And I think as part of my feeling depressed, even though I was passing everything, I highlighted all my books in yellow with the wishful thinking that I could retain what I was reading, and it wasn't working out very well. So I took a first leave of absence, and then I worked in blue-collar jobs, and I loved it. It really gave me a touch for sort of the humanity of the world. In fact, I often romanticize those jobs because what I did is that my main job this was in Boston, and I used to do the window designs inside bars and liquor stores, and I'd put up the Heineken windmills in these bars, and I'd climb up the ladders, and I'd see rat skeletons, and I loved it. And I would talk to the barkeep, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
When I finished my work at the end of the day, I was done. I didn't have the stress over my head.
Yeah.
And my mind came back, to a blue collar level, went back to med school, and then it all happened again. And so what happened is the dean of the school sent me the dean of students. And I'm not a very religious or even spiritual person, but I think a miracle happened because I went to the dean of students who gave me the letter, and the letter said from the dean of the school, we met with Mr. Goulston, he suggests he look for another career, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw because I was passing everything. And I said, what does this mean? And Dean Bill McNary, Boston University Medical School, says to me, you've been kicked out. And I kind of folded over. It felt like a gunshot wound. And I know what that feels like because about 15 years ago, I had a perforated colon that I almost died from. It's like I folded over and I started touching my cheekbones because I thought I was bleeding. And again, it sounds like it has religious overtones, but I kept looking at my hands, and it wasn't blood, it was tears, because it just felt like it just knocked me out because I was probably at a low point. So Fred, imagine hearing this if you come from a background where you're only worth what you can do, kind of conditional love, but no worse than other people's parents. And Dean McNary says to me, Mark, you didn't screw up because you're passing everything, but you are screwed up.
Oh, wow.
But if you got unscrewed up, I think this school would be glad they gave you a second chance. So I started to cry with, I guess, what was empathy or compassion. I didn't know what it was, except I was crying he was pummeling me with this. And then this is what he said to me. So imagine, Fred, you come from a background of you're only worth what you can do. And he said, and even if you don't get better, even if you don't become a doctor, even if you don't do anything the rest of your life, I would be proud to know you. Because you have a streak of goodness in you, Mark, that we should grade in medical school, but we usually don't. And you have no idea how much the world needs that goodness, and you're not going to know it till you're 35, and you deserve to be on this planet, and you're going to let me help you. So he stood up to the whole medical school. He was just a PhD, an anatomy instructor. He stood up to the heads of the hospitals and arranged an appeal. And the appeal saw something in me that I guess he did. But the combination of being at a low point, kind of broken, and his seeing a future for me and value in me that I didn't see, and then his going to bat for me at his own expense,
exactly.
It flipped a switch inside me. And I can tell you, if he had said to me, if I can help you, give me a call, I would have gone back to where I was living, and there's a good chance I wouldn't be here today, Fred.
Interesting.
But he didn't do that. And so I took a leave of absence, and I went out to something called the Menninger Foundation, which you're familiar with. It's now in Houston, but in those days it was in Topeka, Kansas. And I remember Saturday rounds with the Carl Menninger. And it was fascinating because I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, and there I was in the middle of the winter in Topeka, Kansas, And it was during the oil embargo. So I drove from Boston to Topeka, and I was crossing the George Washington Bridge in my little Chevy Vega. I was the only car on the entire bridge because of the oil embargo. Everything, everything was closed down. Sounds like it's what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got there, though, I figured, well, either I'll find something or they'll lock me up. Either way, hopefully I won't fall through the cracks. Because I'd gone to undergraduate school at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and then I was there in medical school in Boston. And I just wanted to get away from all those voices in my head telling me what I should do and yada, yada, yada. And when I got to Topeka and Topeka State Hospital, I had a knack of getting through to schizophrenic farm boys. Now, I don't know anything about farm boys or farming. And I remember I'd go around to these psychiatrists and I'd say, is this legitimate? And they said, what? I mean, I just walk around in the middle of snow here in Topeka with them. And they seemed to connect with me. And they said, it's legitimate and you have a knack.
Interesting.
I never thought I had a knack at anything by this time. I was just trying to survive. So that went in, and that with the combination of the dean stepping in, I came back, went back to med school, finished med school, went on to my residency in psychiatry at UCLA. And Fred, I went 12 years without taking a sick day. I mean, I would work with 104 temperature because I was afraid that if I took a sick day, I would drop out again. I kid you not. I was a little bit of a nutcase.
I got it. Yeah.
But what happened is I just paid it forward to my patients. And one of my other early mentors was a fellow named Dr. Ed Schneidman, one of the pioneers in suicide prevention. He was at UCLA, and he would refer me still suicidal inpatients that needed to be discharged. So he'd go up, do a consultation. They weren't acutely suicidal, and they, signed all the things to cover, the legality. But, people were saying, they're still suicidal. And some of the residents were nervous about seeing them on the outside. And residents could pick who they chose after discharge. So Ed Schneidman would go and meet with them, and then he would call me, and it was always the same call. I miss Ed, I miss Dean McNary, and he'd call me and he'd say, Mark, I'm here with this lovely young woman. I'm here with this handsome young man. They're in a lot of pain, Mark. You could help them, see them. And then I'd get on the phone and I'd talk and I'd make an appointment and they would be discharged. And here was my good fortune, which I think contribute not only the experience with that dean of students and going to Topeka, but I think my good fortune is just before I finished training, I was supposed to go into, I think, a geriatric fellowship, and it fell through at the last minute. So I shrugged my shoulders and I said, well, I'll just go out and practice. And I made this discovery as I was seeing these suicidal patients. I made the discovery that as I was checking boxes in the protocol, about their depression, their negative feelings, their sleep, their appetite, self-destructive tendencies, what happened is increasingly, as I was checking boxes, I look into their eyes, and increasingly I recognized that they were screaming out at me with their eyes saying, I'm running out of time and you're checking boxes. And it got louder and louder. And so I threw away the clipboard. And then I learned to just listen into their eyes and let it take me wherever it took me. So I think that was the beginning of surgical empathy. And it was interesting. One of the things that Dr. Schneidman, mentored me in, because he was kind of an eccentric, iconoclastic person, but he was so well published, UCLA, kept him. But I loved all my mentors. And this is one of the things that he said that I continued. And I think it's 4 questions. When he would be with people, he would say, what hurts? Where does it hurt? How much does it hurt? Take me there. What hurts? Where does it hurt? How much does it hurt? Take me there. And something I discovered, and I do a lot of training now to parents, especially, and councils if they'll let me in. But, a lot of times universities will bar me because this is not evidence-based. And I say, well, in 25 years, none of my patients died by suicide. Yeah, but what's your evidence? Well, I guess I don't have any evidence. So what was interesting is a little bit of my, a minor passive aggressive grudge I still have, I guess. But sometimes researchers in depression and suicide, professors would send me their kids. And I'd say, do you have any interest in figuring out what I'm doing because it seems to help? And it's like they were robots saying, well, if it's not evidence-based and you don't have a control group, we can't look at it, because we get a lot of wild therapies. And I said, yeah, I understand that. But why are you sending me your kid? Well, because I'm worried about my kid and you seem to have a pretty good track record. And then I just shrugged my shoulders and I'd say, okay, send me your kid. And what I've been trying to teach in the world is this surgical empathy. And I'll share something that if you're listening in and you practice this for a week, it will change everything you know about communication. So last year, I spoke in Moscow along with a Nobel Prize winner named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And I have 9 books, and 5 of them are bestsellers in Russia. So, that's why they brought me over. And there's a video of this. If you go to YouTube, Mark Goulston, you'll find it somewhere. And so imagine this, there were 1,000 Russians in the room and their manager, it's a business audience, managers, entrepreneurs, CEOs. And the title of my talk was Change Everything You Know About Communication. And so I'm up there in front of them and I say, and it's translated in real time from English to Russian, but they could hear my tone, even though they didn't understand what I was saying. And it's amazing how quickly they could translate things. So there's a combination of someone translating it, but they could still hear my tone.
Sure.
And so what I said to them, so I want you to picture this audience, they're a little skeptical. And I said, if I focus on what you're listening to right now, and I give you a bunch of bullet points, you'll write them down. You'll try some of them. Some of them will work. Most of them won't. Because it works for me, but not you. But if I'm entertaining and I give you some stories, you'll give me your mind for an hour. And then I switched from my AM voice, which that was, to my FM voice. And the tone, I said, but if instead I focus on what you're listening for, and I get it right, and I deliver on it, you'll give me everything. And then I said, this is what I think you're listening for. If you're managers, CEOs, and entrepreneurs, you're listening for a way to get better measurable results. That's how you're judged. Better measurable results, you get a promotion. Worse measurable results, it doesn't look too good. Is that true? Duh. And I said, the second thing I think you're listening for is a way to get those results that's less stressful, because you're drinking too much, you're eating too much, you look like a mess, your people are like that. So you're listening for a way to get better measurable results in a way that's less stressful. Is that true? Duh. And then I said to them, here's what you're most listening for. You're listening for tips and tactics that I can give you that you can use immediately. And I mean immediately. And you don't have to buy a book. I haven't written this book yet. And you don't have to take a course. I haven't created the course. You're listening for me to give you tactics that are doable by you immediately, that get you better results, that's less stressful. And if we pull that off, it will have been worth the more than $500 and a day of your time to come here. Is that true? And they go, oh, duh. They get enthusiastic. I say, sit down already. Come on. But what I'm suggesting is whoever you're with is always listening for something. And I'm going to demonstrate it with you, Fred. And I want you to tell me if there's an internal shift in your experience.
Okay.
So if you're listening, so imagine you're listening to me and, I'm giving you some useful information and, I'm checking the box. You're checking the boxes saying, I think this is useful. I think some of my, listeners will like this. So you're listening to me and, a lot of the people that interview me listen to me, and that's a transactional conversation. But I think this is what you're listening for. See my FM voice there? I think what you're listening for, Fred, is that people who listen to your podcast trust you. They have confidence in you. They believe you're going to give them valuable information that's going to improve their lives, their success in their medical field, make them better people. And you're listening for information that will help them do that because you want to honor their trust in you and their confidence that you're going to give them value. You're also listening for someone who may be an expert, maybe has great books, but he's a stiff. I mean, he is boring, he's irrelevant, he's tangential, and you're going to have to protect your listeners from him. And then you're going to have to go back and say, I don't know how to say this to you, but we can't use the podcast. So is any of that accurate?
I don't We'll give you A. I'm good with A, actually delivering on what my listeners are listening for and really listening through their trust of me to provide them a guest that is worthwhile, or a guest who's going to make a difference in their life, or a guest who's going to bring something forth to have them be either more effective or more in tune or more optimized in the world of whatever healthcare or whatever interests they have. I'm definitely listening for that. As far as this stiff stuff and telling you that this isn't going to work, what I'm most enchanted about that, Mark, really, is how that theme has really run through your life. That, that's the 12 years without a sick day. That's the guy who, even on the second time you dropped out of medical school, you were hanging on by a thread and ready to hear and ready to take the coaching of someone who really saw your brilliance in the goodness that you are, in the true goodness that you are, whether or not Mark Goulston becomes an MD. There was a man here who saw that who you were for the world, I mean, who you really had to be, who you got to be, who you were almost accountable to for the world, needed to be hatched and unleashed. And that man sits with this thing that maybe, just maybe, we're going to learn if we just look for 1 second that you're not going to make it. Yeah, sorry, Mark, you don't meet the grade in this podcast, and we're going to have to let this thing go. But actually, I wasn't listening for that. I know your greatness. I hold you to greatness. I held you to greatness since before I met you. And there's a real opportunity here to get that's your humanity speaking to us. And that your brilliance is also fueled by that concern. So thank you for sharing it, even both humorously and honestly, with me and my guests. I mean, me and my listeners.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So I passed the sniff test?
That's so far, Mark. We'll get back to you at the end of the show to see whether or not you really made the grade. But so far, you're doing fabulous. I want to let you know.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a phrase, and I'm trying to cut myself some slack. And there's a phrase called the imposter syndrome. I mean, it seems to be bandied around. And I think I've accepted who I am, and I think the imposter syndrome, I think it goes back to, my challenges with the psychiatric establishment, because they will say, if it's not evidence-based, what's your criteria? What's your research?
Yeah.
And what I say is, now they use a term called lived experience, but, most academicians will poo-poo that. Lived experience, that's empirical BS. But I guess what I've learned to say, and just, because I just don't want to suffer with this, is, well, I don't know what the research evidence is, but I got a pretty good track record.
Yes, you do. This idea, Mark, and, this idea of the listening that you're providing. Oh, by the way, this idea of you being someone who is at least worldly respected as suicide prevention physician, clinician, doctor, makes so much sense with the story that you just said. It's like, it's organic. It comes right from the bones, long before Menninger and long before medical school. So I want to just honor and acknowledge and appreciate that as a fellow doctor, man, etc. The thread is easy to see how your experience got translated into who you get to be for the world in that arena. So thank you for that. And the other thing I want to really point to is is there an exclamation point on the end of just listen, by the way, in the title? There is, right?
No, it's quotation. So it's, like I said, I think it's 27 languages. And I have a lot of trouble getting booked in America because Americans want to be listened to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And also, integrity is important to me. Early on, some places, some financial institutions would say, oh, we want to teach our people how to listen. And I remember, saying, turning away some good money. I said, you don't want them to learn how to listen. You like some of the nifty tools and tactics. You want them to close more business. And I learned how to listen off of people trusting me.
Exactly.
You can do a book study if you want. It's a little bit like what Robert Cialdini and his influence book. I mean, he has said you can use this for good or you can use this for bad. But, I'm kind of aligned with his values, which is I'll write it and I have no control how you use it. Something, I don't know if you'll be aligned with this, but something I have a lot of ambivalence about is NLP. Because when Grinder and Bandler came up with it, they really meant it as a way to reach people and do good. But I know many people who are NLP practitioners and they're glib about watch how I can manipulate this person. Turns my stomach. But again, I think you come up with something and you have no control over how someone will use it. But I just won't train people to use what I teach them to manipulate others. Because, look, I've dealt with people that have been abused and raped and molested and whatever. I just can't help people to use what I know to take advantage of people.
Well, one of the things I think I probably am speaking for my listener base here is that and I'm really getting a taste of it today, even more so than previous conversations that we've had, is, the essence of your listening is coming from a space that most of us don't access when we're speaking in normal conversation. Like who you are not only as a listener, but who you are as a speaker, listening to the speaking of the person who's speaking to you. So, your listening and your speaking are emanating from a space sort of like a space that is umbrellas, a space of trust, a space of that the content that you could speak almost effectively in a language where no one understood your words as you could if people do understand your words. Maybe there's even an advantage in Russia when the translation hasn't hit home, but they still can hear your tone and totally get what you're up to. Like speaking to you is speaking to a man who is coming from trust as your contribution. Like, that I trust you to be able to hold this conversation. That I'm gaining trust in you as I speak to you. And then who you get to be is a listening for that. And then it seems to me your speaking also emanates from that space. And that's why the conversation is both unique in some ways, you have a unique style, but then you're able to have it be a contribution for others. And that can be for clinicians or just people communicating with their friends or their hostages or their prisoners or their correction officers. Whatever it is, there's an opportunity to speak from a space where the content doesn't carry nearly the weight as the context of being listened to and listening. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is fair. You're triggering something. I've never really said what I'm about to say, but people do remember stories. And I guess people say I'm a pretty good storyteller. But I wanted to share, because it's crystallizing, if I may, 3 episodes in which I learned to listen into people's minds, into people's eyes, and into people's souls. So can I share 3 stories that I think you might like, and I hope the listeners will tolerate?
My honor, Dr. Goulston, please.
So I think one of the moments I did decide to become a psychiatrist is it was during, I think, one of the years, I'm not sure if it was before or after the second leave of absence, but I was on rounds as a medical student at the VA hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. And it was, I think, a medical rotation. And again, I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but picture this. We're outside a veteran's room, and we'll call him the Jones. And everybody is the resident, the intern, the attending, they're all bantering with each other. Oh, I think he needs surgery. Oh, I think he needs oncology. I think he needs more tests. And I'm there just barely grasping all the details and feeling less than everyone. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just watching this. And then a nurse comes over and says, "Oh, didn't you hear Mr. Smith jump from the roof last night? He's in the morgue." And it just went quiet. And they looked at each other, the other doctors, they didn't know what to say. And I swear, as loud, as clear as day, I heard a voice that said maybe he needed something else. I mean, I heard clearly. And, then they went on to the next room, shrugged their shoulders, they're doing rounds.
Right. Got to move on.
Yeah. And then the second episode was when I was at UCLA. I was called up to one of the oncology floors. I was told, "We need you to come up here and okay an order for soft restraints and an antipsychotic, because we'll call this guy Mr. Jones, because he's pulling at his IVs, he's pulling at his respirator tube, he's just kicking and whatever. And please come up and okay the order for soft restraints and the antipsychotic." So I get into the room, and Mr. Jones' eyes are as wide as saucers, and he can't speak because of this tube in his throat. He's going, and I'm looking in his eyes, and he's screaming at me with his eyes, and I'm saying, "What is it?" And he goes, and he's telling me something, but I can't make it out. And I put a pencil in his hand, which is strapped down, and I said, "Write it down." He scribbles. It doesn't make sense. And they said, "He's just psychotic." And then I looked at him, and I said, "You're pulling at your IVs, you're pulling at the respirator, you're kicking. So we had to put your legs and arms down, and I'm giving you something that will help you rest and sleep. And then, when things calm down, we'll take everything off." So a day later, the doctors paged me and told me, "Mr. Jones is up in his bed off the respirator, sitting up off the soft restraints, and he told us to page you." So I go up there, and I go into the room, and he's seated in bed, and he looks at my eyes, and with his eyes, he says, "Pull up a chair." And he wouldn't let go of my eyes with his eyes. And he just held on to them with a vice grip. And he said, "What I was trying to tell you and everyone else is that a piece of the respirator tubing had broken off and was stuck in my throat. And you do know that I will kill myself before I go through something like that. Do you understand me?" And I just kept looking in his eyes, and my eyes kind of teared up with just horror, because, and I just I'm so sorry, I understand. And so that was one of the lessons about people screaming out at you, and you gotta find out what they're doing. And then the third one was I was referred a suicidal patient that had made 3 or 4 attempts and had been in hospital. In those days, you could stay in a hospital for a month or two. And she'd been in the hospital 2 or 3 months every year for about 4 or 5 years. And Dr. Schneidman referred her to me, and I'll call her Nancy. And I used to moonlight. Our listeners know what that is. I would cover for, the doctors at actually Metropolitan State Hospital in Norwalk, California. And sometimes you're up 30 hours, depending on the shift, and you're
Sure.
And you can be tired, you can be overtired. And when I share what I'm about to share, I don't tell this to my other psychiatric colleagues because they'll say, oh, you had a dissociative episode. What happened next? I choose to see it differently. So I come into the office and there is Nancy, and she never made eye contact. She was always staring to the left or right of me. And I'm overtired. When you get overtired, you get a little wiggy inside. And as I'm seated with her and she didn't make eye contact, the color in the room turned to black and white. So I'm looking out and the room is black and white. It's like a black and white movie. It's like watching On the Waterfront. And then I started to get cold and chilled, and I thought I'm having a stroke or a seizure. So I did a neurologic exam on myself. I'm tapping my, I'm looking at my fingers, I'm tapping my elbows, and because I want to see if I had a stroke or seizure. And I checked, and I didn't. And then I had this crazy idea that I was looking at the world through her eyes.
Interesting.
And feeling what she felt. And because I was sleep deprived, I blurted out something that normally I wouldn't have. And I said, Nancy, I didn't know it was so bad, and I can't help you kill yourself. But if you do, I will still think well of you. I'll miss you, and maybe I'll understand why you had to get out of the pain. And I said to myself, did I think that or did I say that? And then I said, I think I just said it and I just gave her permission. I'm screwed. And that was the first time she looked at me. And she never really made eye contact. I didn't think I was helping her, although I'd been seeing her for 6 months, and that was the longest she'd gone without a suicide attempt. So she looks at me and she locks under my eyes, just like the person in the hospital. And I thought she was going to say to me, thank you for understanding. I'm overdue. And I looked at her and I said, what are you thinking? And it was like the movie Awakenings, where patients just start talking. And she looked at me and she said, if you can really understand why I might have to kill myself to get out of all the pain, maybe I won't need to. And then she smiled and she was holding on to my eyes. And I said, and this was another bolus of surgical empathy. So I'm looking into her eyes and she's just holding onto my eyes, and the color's coming back in the room and the coldness is going away. I think that was an oxytocin flush right there. And I'm looking in her eyes and I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to give you any treatments or solutions that have been tried before that didn't quite work. Unless you tell me, can we try something? Would that be okay? And she looked at me intrigued. She looked at me with a look that said, keep talking, I'm listening. And then I reached back into her eyes and I said, what I'm going to do instead, and I'm reliving it right now, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to find you wherever you are, and I'm going to keep you company there as long as it takes, because I just don't want you to be alone there anymore. Would that be okay? And then we both smiled. And so, so I think some of these experiences will give you sort of a taste of kind of, where I come from in the world. And I think this is teachable, by the way,
Yeah.
When I give trainings, I teach people, to look into each other's eyes and teach them what to look for and not to be scared when they see hurt, fear, or pain, or even anger. And if when you're listening into people's eyes, you just let it draw you in, as opposed to trying to keep a barrier between you and them because you're afraid of those feelings. As they allow you to draw you in, what will happen is they will start to cry. So we call this thing surgical empathy because, and you have some healthcare providers, so I can get away with this, because I see suicide as a hopelessness abscess in the dark night of the soul. And I did a article on why people kill themselves. It's not depression. About 500,000 views in 8 days. I wrote it after Anthony Bourdain died by suicide. And what I wrote about is, depression, lost marriage, lost relationship, they can all contribute, but there's hundreds of millions of people who have all those things and they don't kill themselves. And my observation is that when people do kill themselves, at the end, they feel despair. And if you break despair into the word despair, they feel unpaired with reasons to live, hopeless, without a future, helpless and powerless, without an ability to do anything, useless, worthless, meaningless, purposeless. And when they all line up, pointless. And then they attach to death as a way to take it away. So death is empathic to despair, and death beckons them and says, I'll take it all away. And when you compare with people, and what Just Listen was about, I think why it did well, is it's about how do you cause people to feel felt by you, not just understood. And when people feel felt by you without your having to, and I'm not against treatments, they're life-saving. I just come at it from a different angle. But when people feel felt by you, they get this surge of oxytocin, and the more oxytocin, the less cortisol. And what happens is they detach from death, taking the pain away, and attach to you, causing them to feel felt by you, and they feel less alone, and they feel less despair.
Thank you. Those are beautiful anecdotes. To me, one of the things I'm hearing is really how terrific of a student of humanity you are. When you think about it, this last piece is a version of, where's your pain? What's your pain? Where's your pain? How much does it hurt? And take me there. And, that opportunity to take that pathway with anyone. It doesn't have to be a woman in a soon to be black and white room looking at her last breath as relief from her emotional pain. It's not just there that this is useful. Mark, I think what you're really saying is that this is what all people want, that you don't have to be on the edge of suicidal despair to be really looking to be, to feeling felt, if you dare, really feeling from another felt that you've been gotten or you've been, heard or listened to a point where you really get that you are, in fact, empathizing at a level of seeing the world from the person you're speaking with. And there's maybe nothing more rewarding and rejuvenating, revitalizing than having someone at least get or feel felt by another. And I hear that as your stand. Please correct any of that. Or if it's correct, I really do understand. And I thank you for who you've been in this area. It's not a place where people venture naturally.
Well, I'll share something where I'm at now because I'm sort of an outlier. Rules and cliches don't seem to apply to me, but there is one cliche that does apply to me. I've become a grandparent in the last couple of years.
Yay.
And I told my wife, we've been married 42 years and she's terrific. And I'm amazed at what she tolerates with me. And I told her, I said, I think I once loved you as much as I love our grandchildren, but I can't remember. And she said, I'm not offended because I know I didn't love you that much. But here's what I'm learning. Here's an experiment I'm running. So my grandson's getting close to 2 years. I think he's about 22 months. And he's just starting to talk. But what I'm noticing that I didn't notice with my own children because I was too busy, having to go out, I'd check boxes with them,
right,
when they were young and I'd go earn a living. But I'm more present with my grandson and I now have a 4-month-old granddaughter. But with my grandson, what I was noticing is if he felt pain and he'd cry or he was proud of something and he'd smile, that he was looking for a connection and he couldn't communicate it with words because he didn't have words yet. And so what I'm trying to inoculate him with is Erik Erikson basic trust.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's in pain or when he's proud of something, I'll look in his eyes and my daughter says, are you going to do that goo-goo eye thing with my kid? And we lock onto each other's eyes and it's almost mesmerizing because when I look into his eyes, he doesn't have to say the words. What I'm communicating is, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
And I am infusing him with that. And I think it's helping. And one of the things that's a pet peeve of mine, and I'll just say it, I think social media and technology has addicted the world to adrenaline as the sole source of dopamine. And once upon a time, oxytocin also helped dopamine. Closeness, intimacy, empathy, compassion, patience. Once upon a time, all those things also triggered well-being and dopamine. But what's happened is with all the social media and all the technology, and I'll even say it, and with tech CEOs who are a little bit on the spectrum, who are highly productive, but they don't necessarily relate to people, but they know how to generate excitement and revenue. And I think the world has become addicted to their screens and to adrenaline and momentum. And the more adrenaline, the more, societal ADD gets, you need the adrenaline. It's, the adrenaline is natural Adderall. But what's happened is people don't connect to each other. And recently, people have been telling me about a number of suicides at colleges. And last weekend, there were 2 at a college my son's attending and a high school of someone that I work with one of the books on. And here's what I'd like to tell the world that I'm discovering from my grandson is I think when you're really young and you're an infant, you have primal hurt and fear. You hurt yourself and you're afraid, so you cry. And then what happens is if no one's paying attention to you, you get angry to get their attention. But even then, if they don't tune in the right way, if they neglect you or they criticize you, go back to sleep already, or they coddle you, what happens is that can really screw you up and you internalize that and you don't have a secure self. And then what I think's happened, because I'm running into this with a lot of high achievers who when they start to hit 45 and they have all the money in the world, they still feel unhappy. And I actually interviewed a fellow named Chip Conley who owned a string of hotels called Joie de Vivre. And then he went over to Airbnb to help them. And he was on my podcast, My Wake Up Call. And what he talked about is that he was addicted to achievement. And he reached a point where there was a point where 5 of his friends died by suicide. And he got suicidal, even though he had all the money in the world. And one of the things we talked about, and he liked this, he transitioned into something called the Modern Elder Academy, because he just saw this transactional world was so empty. And what we co-discovered on the podcast with him, I said, I think you have something that we can call the syndrome of disavowed yearning. And what that means is that when you were very, very young, and when you felt hurt or afraid or excited, you yearned for a kind of connection that was just right, but it wasn't to be had. So instead of turning to drugs, a kid brother or something like that, you discovered achievement. And then what happened is people patted you on the head. Good for you, good boy. And you liked the achievement. And then you kept achieving. And that worked pretty good for about 40 years. And here's the dilemma that I see, because I'm really trying to figure out these young adults and teenagers who are killing themselves, who are high achievers. There was one in the news recently, a fellow named Tommy Raskin. He was a second-year law student, and he killed himself a week ago. And his father wrote a huge tribute. His father's, I think, in the House of Representatives, Jeremy Raskin. And this kid had accomplished tons. I mean, he accomplished more than you can imagine. So I'm really trying to figure this out. So I want to run this by you because it's half-baked, and you can tell me, keep it half-baked, Mark, or I think you're onto something. Because I put myself into Tommy Raskin's shoes. And again, I'm just trying to understand him empathically. I'm not trying to diagnose because he's gone. And I thought, wow, I wonder if as a young kid, maybe he had hurt and fear, and it wasn't connected to in the right way for whatever reason. Well-intentioned parents, busy. As I said, I was busy. I wasn't as connected to my kids as I am to my grandkids. And what if he discovered achievement? And that can be intoxicating and seductive. And then I'm thinking, I wonder if he created a monster because they mentioned that his depression started when he was around 20. And I think was in his late 20s or 30. And I'm thinking, let's say you discover achievement and you're getting reinforced for that. You can also become a perfectionist. You can also hate to fail. And people have high expectations of you when you're a star. So there you are chasing achievement. You're avoiding feeling or processing or, hurt and fear. And so you're in a double bind because you have to keep feeding all those high expectations or else you'll fail. And inwardly, it's a way of being disconnected from that more vulnerable part of you that you ran away from into achievement. So I think it's half-baked, but I'm wondering if that's a dilemma for some of these young high achievers who we hear these tragic stories and they kill themselves, that they get caught on this hamster wheel of achievement and perfection and fear of failure and not being able to accept that. So that drives them crazy in the world. But they also know, like Chip Conley, it's running away from this yearning I had when I was young to be connected to when I was hurt and afraid that just wasn't to be had. So does any of that make any sense?
It makes brilliant sense, Mark. And one of the things, what are you calling it? Disavowed yearning syndrome?
No, disavowed yearning. So there was a yearning to be connected to
Yes.
a tuned way,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I did with all my patients. I
Mm-hmm.
went to where they were, I
Mm-hmm.
joined them in hell, and they didn't have to perform for me to go there.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But if that wasn't to be had because your good parents, they didn't get it from their parents. So they didn't, we're talking about good, well-intentioned parents.
Sure.
Or when they saw you upset, they tried to make it better.
Right.
They gave you a solution. They didn't enable you to feel it all the way through. And then you shifted to achievement. I'll share another story because people remember stories. This one I think you'll find. So I used to do house calls to dying patients and help them make peace with themselves, sometimes at the end of their life when some of them really achieved a lot, but felt that they blew it in life. I remember one person at the end, I said, boy, you seem like you're in a mess. And I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I know you. And he looked at me and he said, I think I outsmarted myself because everything I thought was unimportant is important. And everything I thought was important is unimportant. And I just ran out of time. And then there was someone else going back to the disavowed yearning, and I think this is a fascinating story. So I did house calls to this world-renowned musician, and he had won Grammys in 3 decades. And he was as well known for his drug use and run-ins with the police as he was for his music. And again, I just speak straight to people, and I'm speaking the way I speak to you. And I said to him, and he was dying, and I said, "Hey, what was all that stuff with the drugs and the police?" And he looked at me and he said, I guess I'm what you'd call a child prodigy, and I knew I had really musical talent. And every time I did something well with my musical talent, my pushy mom would say, "That's my little boy." My managers would say, "That's great." And they really corrupted my full enjoyment because they took credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't crazy enough to throw it away. And he said, but one of the reasons I did the drugs is because nobody wanted to take credit for that.
That's just incredible.
I know that I owned that.
That is awesome story. That's beautiful story. That I love that punchline. It's so brilliant. It really cuts to a truth here. And there's just something about, again, these are just doubling and redoubling and amplifications of this notion of really listening at a level that is uncommon. Really like what's so here is that I love this disavowed yearning, actually, Mark. I really do. And I really get that there's something about, like in this last case, it's like, look, it isn't like he had to own his achievement, but it's certainly, when someone else takes responsibility for the good things, we'll go to any means, we'll go to any ends. This is what it shows, drugs and police, no one's going to own that with me. No one's going to say, yeah, I'm responsible for my son being a drug addict and I'm proudly responsible. That's not how it's going to go. So he was able to get some ownership of his life when he was deviant, right? When he was out there doing something that no one else would want to share responsibility. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. That was an amazing story, really.
It is. It is. It's a great story. Well, Mark, we could go on, and I trust we will go on, by the way. It's really, the more conversations I have with you, the more I feel really honored to be in your presence. And this idea of, to be a psychiatrist, actually, in the same, we're in this international group of men who are up to something in the world. And so we get to be in that together. And there's also something about, being committed to optimizing the mental health of people who, for whatever reason, come in contact with us. And there's something about sharing that responsibility with you that I really appreciate. And, you are a great teacher, Mark. You're a great storyteller. And thank you so much for being so succinct and actually helping us in many ways see how you exactly became the man who wrote Just Listen, the suicide prevention expert that you are, the, surgical empathy, and now, disavowed yearning, and these stories that really drive home the point of listening so others feel felt. And, don't let the words get in the way of a good communication is almost what I hear you saying. There's something here that's underneath those words that really represents what's wanted and needed when someone's communicating with each other. So,
yeah, something I'm excited about is we're doing a good friend of mine, Gabe Charbonneau, who's with a group called Ostlers Alliance. We're starting pilot groups with doctors who are either burned out or they're heading towards burnout. And we're so excited because what we're going to do is bring them together and in that setting facilitate their sharing a lot of disavowed thoughts and feelings that they needed to do to function at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you disavow those things, and what enables us in the age of COVID to disavow thoughts and feelings is the danger triggers adrenaline, and adrenaline helps insulate us from our thoughts and feelings. And then when the danger passes, like we see in veterans, the adrenaline insulation goes away. And everything that we pushed away in order to survive threatens to break through as nightmares, flashbacks, and it demands to come out, but it feels like it's going to eviscerate you and shatter you. And in my work with veterans, when they feel they're about to be eviscerated and shattered, that's when they put a gun to their head, because if they believe they're going to shatter and never come back, and they really believe that because they're feeling it, that's when they use that gun to take control of their life by ending it.
Yeah, understandable. It's really the cost benefit analysis at that particular moment sure looks like death is a better option. And whatever you do to step in there when and who's ever smart enough to or resourceful enough to ask you to step in there is really the magic that you are. But also what I hear, Mark, is your commitment and your dedication to passing this along so that someone who isn't Boston University and UCLA and UC Berkeley trained physician, that really the person on the streets can really get some radical skills put in place fairly instantly by really taking on some of these methodologies, some of this way of being that has people listening in a whole new direction than what we might find ourselves with otherwise.
Well, you know what it is? It's daring to feel. And again, I think it goes back to when I hit a rock bottom. And if I'd gone back to my apartment, I wouldn't be here. But I look at Dean McNary as an angel sent to me, because when I hit rock bottom and he told me what he told me, which was at the beginning of our interview, it's like he put his hand underneath me hitting rock bottom and said, "You're not going anywhere. You deserve to be here, and I'm going to fight for you." So I really owe it to him. And I miss him.
Yeah, I got it. Well, thanks for being with us today, and thanks for sharing. It's really wonderful. And thanks for being so heartfelt and authentic. Thanks for being so entertaining and humble. And thanks also for being, exactly who you are as a man, as a grandfather, as a husband, and as a friend. So it's a deep honor to have you here. Mark, our listeners want to know how to get in touch with you, or at least how to follow you, or how to learn from you, or how to just have you in their virtual Rolodex. How might they do that?
Well, whycopewhenyoucanheal.com. We have a dedicated website to the new book, and it has excerpts, and we're doing interviews every day because there is a tsunami coming. I hope it doesn't, but our healthcare workers are in a war.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book with my co-author because I don't want them to be turned into the 22 veterans who kill themselves every day after the war's over because of everything they've seen coming out and threatening to shatter them. So why cope when you can heal? MarkGoulston.com is my own site, and I put lots of content up there. I'm on Instagram, and I have a podcast called My Wake Up Call. And as you mentioned, I have a weekly LinkedIn live show called No Strings Attached, because I'm trying to create an oasis, a cell-free zone on LinkedIn. Because when I empathized with all of LinkedIn, I thought they may all want a deal, they may all want to sell, but what they all need is a break from transaction fatigue. Because everything about LinkedIn, everybody is selling, everybody is reaching out from hunger, and I understand that. So no strings attached. I'll have my guests on, and I'll just share things like I've shared in this show, that anyone is free to do anything they want. You can monetize it. You want to build a course around anything. You don't owe me anything, and you don't have to attribute it to me. Just make the world better.
Fabulous. Beautiful, Mark. Really, really great. Well,
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And there you have it, listeners. And how cool was that? It was really, really beautiful to be with you today. Wherever you are in your world, it seems like we may have touched something that could make a difference from where you are. And really, that's where I think Mark's magic comes in. And you can hear what I'm saying when I say his humility precedes him. And there's just something about who he is just naturally that brings forth a warmth and brings forth a purpose and bring forth some reason to take the next step. But not only take the next step, take the step, with confidence, and take the step with love, and take the step with listening. So Mark Goulston, it has been a deep pleasure to be with you. I wish you very well. I'll see you soon, see you shortly online, certainly in some of the shared areas that we presently traffic in together. And wow, just a pleasure. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Till we meet again, and I hope very soon, Fred. Thanks for having me on.
Beautiful. Take care. It was really great to be with my colleague, Dr. Goulston, today. I know a little bit about him. I knew about his book, and he's, someone that has some national recognition. And he's someone who's really made a difference in the world of listening. And he's someone beginning to make an even larger difference in this recent book, Why Cope When You Can Heal. And he's everybody's friend. I mean, people just know and love him. So for me, it was just a great opportunity to not only introduce him to you, but to befriend him at a collegial level and to really be honored by being in his presence and his soft-spokenness. You can really see why he is and how he got to be from who he was as a child, who he was as a medical student, and who he then became as a physician, a clinician, a healer, and a listener. Probably when you were listening, you thought of at least a few people who would love to hear this episode. And I'm going to ask you to reach out to them as soon as you can and invite them to listen to this episode and then subscribe to the podcast. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'm going to ask you to do so as well. Just take a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast. And while you're at it, I'd love you to, leave a review, because subscribes and reviews are the best two ways that we can reach our listeners. And with that, the Welcome to Humanity podcast can be set out to larger groups of audiences. I would be truly grateful for that support. And the other thing is, if you want to really catch up with past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast, and you'll be able to pull down the episodes from the past. So until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been another incredible edition of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for listening. Have a beautiful rest of the day, rest of the week, and have a great life. It's really a pleasure. Take care. Bye for now.